So Tell with Moana is a program from Māori television. And she's obviously been doing the rounds and getting the politicians in, because I see Marama's in there and some other people as well already. And they are, and this is new, they are talking about the election results. And there was a 2 or 3 minute bit with David Seymour where they were talking about the referendum. I want to talk a bit about this tonight because I've had some interactions on Twitter today to do with referendum. I want to clarify something for people. So let's have a look when they have a bit of a chat about the referendum on the treaty.
Speaking of debate, of course, the referendum around Te Tiriti you suggested was a bottom line. What's happening with that?
Well, let's see how those discussions go, but it's certainly critical that New Zealand is able to discuss what the treaty means in 2023. And it's not about whether we value the treaty. Of course we do. The question is, do we agree with the interpretation that's been slapped on it in the last 30 years? I think a lot of people have got confused. They think that if you don't agree with the way that the courts and certain interest groups have interpreted the treaty since 1987, you don't agree with the treaty. Actually, we're pro-treaty. We just don't like the divisive way it's been interpreted lately.
Well, part of your action could be considered to be contributing to that divisiveness, I guess.
Well, I don't really see how promoting universal human rights and inclusion is divisive. The fact that we've been continually accused of divisiveness, but when challenged, none of the accusers can give us any examples of why they think we're being divisive. I think that probably tells you all you need to know.
So on that, right, let's think about that.
Fuck, he's a weasel.
Is there anything that you can think of that he has specifically said that's created that divisiveness? Now, I would say yes, because every time he talks like this, what he's doing is amplifying a sector of society to be racist. Like he's giving them permission to be racist. And it's a bit like we were talking the other day about Fox News. Fox News may not tell their hosts what to say, but they hire hosts that they know are going to say things and see things in a certain way. So there may or may not be anything specific. Like if you looked up racist things Donald Trump has said, you get a big long list. He's easy. If you look up race baiting by David Seymour or racist things by David Seymour, it's harder to nail down a specific thing that comes out of his mouth, like a specific thing that comes out of his mouth. But I would suggest that what he has done is he's made it more acceptable to hold on to some pretty abhorrent views. Like I had an interaction today. I put up a clip from last night, and I've had a huge number of people agreeing with David Seymour and talking about Bloody Marys. You know, so they're using David Seymour as a gateway to share their racist thoughts. Is it David Seymour saying those exact words? No. Is it David Seymour making it okay for those views to come out of the shadow? I would say yes. And I wanted to, before you jump in, Chewie, I wanted to read this out. This is from the press. And this is Christopher Hipkins speaking. Christopher Hipkins says this. For example, David Seymour has interpreted tino rangatiratanga only as a right to authority over property, not self-determination, in a way that scholars, the courts, and most importantly, Māori, have defined it for over a century. So when he says it needs to be reinterpreted, the way he's interpreting it seems to be contrary to the way that most, including the courts, including scholars, including Māori, have defined it. His new proposed Treaty Act makes no mention of Māori, or the Crown, or hapu, or iwi. In fact, it only refers to all New Zealanders as if history never happened. In an interview with broadcaster Julian Wilcox, Luxon said ACT's referendum is divisive and National would not support it. However, he would be open to hearing different views about the treaty principles. In a 2022 interview, Luxon said Māori ceded sovereignty when the treaty was signed, a controversial view not supported by the Waitangi Tribunal. Now, you know, I played that clip last night, or I showed that clip about that documentary about Germany in 1940. One of the things, I've got some German friends who went up through their education system, and they all know the history of Germany through the 30s and 40s like it happened yesterday, because they have a system where they teach it again and again and again to make sure it's never forgotten. What we're seeing in America at the moment is we're seeing, conservative Americans and critical race theory, which is an academic term for a level of education that's typically university, about looking at the impact of race and how it's impacted the world today, critically based on the history. There are people who are trying to write that out of education textbooks. There are people who are trying to write out slavery from education textbooks. There are people in America who are getting books banned, and some of the books they're getting banned, and look, we won't even go into the gender issues because that may not be the historical aspect, but the books they're getting banned are books that highlight how badly slaves were treated. And when I read that, the quote from Christopher Hipkins, thinking, if this is what David Seymour wants, an all New Zealanders thing, it feels like we talked last night about a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. This is one step to getting rid of textbooks and not wanting to talk about what happened in the early 1800s in New Zealand. And I find that quite scary. So he might be saying, just point out where we've done these things. Well, it feels much bigger than that. Like these things to do with race are the foundation is being laid by ACT, and people are choosing to springboard off it. And once we get to step 10 of 1,000 miles and step 100 of 1,000 miles and step 1,000 of 1,000 miles, where will we be with these foundations that ACT is setting, and the questions they're asking now, Chewie?
Yeah, look, I think what David does there, and he does it multiple times. It's like, I've been accused of racism. Show me where I've been racist. It's a classic fucking online debate tactic. I think they call it sea lioning. Yeah. As you ask for unprovable things, because I think David knows exactly what he's doing. He knows the words that he's using. He knows the line that he's walking up to and not crossing, knowing that what he's saying has enough message cut through to the people he's actually talking to, that they will carry it the rest of the way. Yes, David, I don't believe you've said anything explicitly racist. I just think you're tying together a lot of ideas that become racist and speak to racists. I think it's fantastic that you are so even-handed that you can say nice things like, everybody's got to be equal. Everybody's got to be treated equally. Well, that's fantastic. So an old lady falls over on the street. I don't have to pick them up because I wouldn't pick up a 20-year-old that fell in the street.
Yeah.
There should be no accommodation for disability or gender or race. Everything's equal. And that's lovely, isn't it? An 8-year-old can do the same 40-hour week that I can do. Equality. Yeah. It's not equality, David. We didn't have the same starting points. We didn't even have the same track to run. It is not equal. It never has been.
I think what you've just said is that exact point that we've been making here. And we've said this to David Seymour's face. David, the foundation of race baiting and racism is not because you say you want equality for all when it comes to race. It's because you only say you want equality for all when it comes to race. Because as Chewie just said, you don't want equality when it comes to age. You don't want equality when it comes to gender. You don't want equality when it comes to disability. None of those other areas you want to flatten the field for, because, if you're 65 and you're getting the pension, that's discrimination based on age. It just is, right? But it's discrimination we accept, and you don't want to change that. You only want to change issues to do with race, and that's why it's race baiting. Like, let's go out there and see you talking about we need to cancel and make it all even for the 40-year-olds and the 65-year-olds when it comes to the pension. You know what? The pensioners would be up in arms against you because you're making it that you want to make it a level playing field because of race. People of that race are up in arms against you. That's how it works. If you wanted to make it, no more disabled car parks, no more special help in schools for blind students. that community will be up against if you were trying to equal all those discriminations out. But they're not, because the only one you're trying to level out is race. And that's why it's race baiting. And that's why it's racially divisive. And that's what you're sowing.
He's a weasel that uses weasel words. And that's always been my problem with him. I think even when it comes to, like, people are simplifying what he's saying, that we need to do over the Treaty of Waitangi or that sort of thing. But I think he's being even more devious about that. What he's asking for is a re-examining of the principles of the treaty. I'm not going to change the treaty. I'm just going to change some legal stuff around the treaty. Because of course I can't change the treaty. But we can certainly change how we deal with treaty grievances, how we resolve treaty issues, that sort of thing. I can fiddle around the edges of the treaty and change how it's framed and how it's referenced in modern law, so we can put it back to where it was in the 60s, where it was basically useless and ignored. But I'm not saying we should change the treaty. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, we love the treaty. We just hate how you guys interpret it, which is really inconvenient for me. Speaking of,
and my landowning mates.
Let's get to the end of this.
The Indigenous rights, of course.
Sorry, come back up. This is really bizarre. Moana starts talking about the UN and Indigenous rights, right? The rights of the Indigenous people under the UN. And David Seymour... this is something I'd love to speak to, like, a sociologist or a psychologist about, because he doesn't seem to be able to engage. He keeps coming back to fixing roads. I know you're probably going to laugh. It sounds a bit weird, but Moana talks about the importance of, she might not say the importance, but she talks about the rights of the Indigenous people under the UN, and the response to it from David, it's almost like a glitch. It's like he minimizes it and then talks about roads. He does it twice. It's quite bizarre. And I wonder what it is. I genuinely wonder what it is, Tree. Maybe you've got a thought about it when you see it, because it's quite a big conversation, like rights of Indigenous people, even if you disagree with them. But if you disagree with them, then, show us your working. Give us your rationale, what it is, rather than going, yeah, they've never done anything. Now, fixing roads, however, it's quite bizarre.
Declaration of Indigenous rights is an acknowledgement that hasn't really worked in terms of the human rights issues. So that's an ongoing conversation that a lot of people are proposing needs to be addressed.
Yeah, but what's the UN ever done for you?
Well, it's actually become a voice for Indigenous people in terms of that declaration. But I guess these are sort of the things that will be teased out in the next few years.
It's become a voice, but here's the thing. How do we get the roads fixed so you can get around the country, especially from remote areas? How do you get kids to school?
How do you bounce from
knowledge?
the Universal Declaration of Indigenous Rights to
Yeah.
roads?
Because I asked you, what's the...
Isn't it bizarre? It's just like, it's actually bizarre. Like, Moana looks like she's keen to have actually quite a, let's nut this out, because you're not on the side of this. Let's figure it out. Let's give us your rationale. You can see she's engaging, and he's like, yeah, but how do you drive around Northland? It's like, I actually find it quite bizarre. I'm confused as to how this even works in his brain.
UN ever done for you, and you said they're giving you a voice. I say, well, here's some practical things people actually need. And that's the contrast.
Okay, so
who wants the UN to take over the roads?
Out a referendum. That's just the kinds of challenges around compromise.
Then we rule it in, and that's how the negotiation will go.
Did you know that there was a resounding no in Australia around the referendum?
I hadn't seen the final results. I'd heard that was going to be the case from the early results.
It's not looking too positive for the yes.
Well, I think that's very positive for Australia, because they have decided that they want their constitution to be devoid of racial discrimination, and that's how any country's constitution should be.
So he's celebrating the voice falling short. It's a little celebration there. I think it's fantastic.
I think it demonstrates that they don't really acknowledge the special place of their Indigenous people. That's what that says.
And nor should they. They should respect the rights of each individual human being. We've got to stop putting labels on people and saying that some people are born special and others aren't. I mean, I'm sorry.
Say it again, Jude. Make people hear what you just said. Say it again.
I don't think they have ever.
this is part of this argument the whole time. All these groups who people like David Seymour argue that they shouldn't be getting special treatment are all at the bottom of every social statistic. It's like, if they're getting all these special privileges, why are they the bottom of every social statistic? Why are they doing it harder than everybody else?
Do you know what did make Aboriginal people special?
Tell me.
It used to be legal to hunt them.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty special. You could just clear them off your farm. They stole children and gave them to white families. That was their idea of helping.
Yeah.
And David Seymour thinks it's unimportant, that they shouldn't get any sort of special recognition, any sort of special redress. Fuck David Seymour. How about that?
Yeah, this is a thing that they don't seem to want to ever acknowledge. 1967. So that's not actually that long before I was born. I mean, I wasn't born in 1967, but it's not actually that long before I was born.
We're not talking the crazy olden days here.
And this is the thing I always try and educate people with. Sounds a bit patronizing, but I will. I'll say that. Educate people with. So if my grandfather was the wealthiest person in New Zealand, do you think that that would give my father a hand up? Of course it would. Do you think that would give me a hand up? Of course it would. My kids? Of course it would. How long, if my grandfather was the wealthiest person in New Zealand, how many generations do you think that would go before you'd see no positive impact? And I think most people would go quite a lot. So let's flip it. My grandfather was the worst treated person in New Zealand. Do you think that would affect my father? Of course it would. Do you think that would affect me? Of course it would. How far would that go before that harm committed on my grandfather was no part of someone's life? Seymour's ilk are the guys who go, yeah, you know, that was in the past, just get on with things. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. And if you're talking 1967 for Aborigines, and if you're talking in the 1950s in New Zealand, Māori children were getting hit at school for speaking Māori, that's not that long ago. It's not that long ago. So people always agree that if it's a positive, it will carry through the generations, but if it's a negative, no. So when they say they're getting rid of cultural reportings out of courts, you fucking assholes. What are you trying to say? That a kid's upbringing is not going to affect them negatively? You would guarantee that if it was a wealthy upbringing, it would affect them positively, and they would see that in the courts because they'd have the money for the fucking lawyers. But if a kid has a negative or a bad upbringing, it's not going to affect them in courts? Go fuck yourself.
I'll tell you what that is about too, Pat. It's the word cultural. Like, it's that obvious. They don't. If they flag it as a cultural report, people's brains go cultural. Māori, Pacific. They don't think it's the same for everyone. It's actually what David really likes, is that it's something that happens for everyone.
Yeah,
I saw a report of a crime today where the guy was in court today or whatever. It was the court report. Drunk white guy driving around with his mates, took 2 pot shots at the Blenheim police station.
Oh.
Now, there was a cultural report for that, because you need to find out what road this guy has taken to thinking that 2 shotgun blasts at a police station was a good idea to do on a Friday night. Everybody has the ability to get a cultural report done. Because of that, the courts, and now me, know that guy started drinking and doing crimes from the age of 12. The judge described it as a pipeline to prison.
Yep.
But that's the sort of stuff that was disregarded, that was unknown when people went to court. You got their list of crimes, and that was it. You didn't find out about their family history. But for most people, when they hear cultural report, they will think, Māori. So, of course, we don't want to do that.
All right. Let's just get to the end of this, because we are looking forward to the second time. For some reason, David brings up roading when talking about the yes-no vote in Australia. How we get there, we don't know, but let's have a look.
That's just so gross. We've got to stop doing it.
What's gross is their kind of how they're misrepresented across all those indicators, similar to other
Yeah, and
colonised
that's
people.
why we got to get better roads.
Not like individuals.
We got to get better roads because people who live in remote areas find it hard. I grew up in Northern, I can tell you all
I
about
don't
this.
understand how you jump to roads when we start
Well, it's
talking
just
about
the first
Indigenous
example.
rights.
Well, roads connect housing. Housing is very important, because ultimately you talk about Indigenous rights, but I get to practical outcomes. How do we make sure that people are transferring more knowledge from one generation to the next? In charter schools, ACT has done more for that than any other party.
Fucking charter
shut
schools
those
again.
down. So these are the kinds of initiatives that make a practical difference. We've done far more than the UN ever has, so I can tell you.
I think that we'll be having
Goodness
ongoing
me.
conversations, David.
ACT has done far more than the UN ever has. That's what he actually believes. Let's say this. We talked last night about, if there was this referendum, and I think I used the words the courts would overturn it. I probably misspoke a little bit because there is a system in New Zealand where, the laws are made in government and the courts can't necessarily overturn them. I misspoke because in my addled brain, what I was thinking was the courts could make a ruling on whether it was valid or not. And my reference for that, I guess, is this one here. Supreme Court rules in favour of make it 16 to lower voting age when the Supreme Court of New Zealand made the ruling that it was discriminatory against 16-year-olds not to be able to vote. Now, the government has ignored that. So when I was talking about the courts last night and the courts getting involved in the if ACT and New Zealand First and National tried to do this, this is more what I was thinking. I was more thinking about it being taken before the Supreme Court and ruled unconstitutional and ruled racist and have a ruling put by the Supreme Court out there. So just because I used the word overturned, in my head, that's what I was thinking. I just want to make that clear tonight because some people were, even though I said that a few times today, people were rightfully confused because I used a wrong phrasing. That's what I was thinking. The courts will get involved if they try and do that, and the courts will get involved. The Supreme Court will get involved if they push it through, and they will make a ruling on whether it's legal or not. The government would then have to change it. I get that. So my use of the term overturn it was probably wrong, but that's what I think will happen. Because as we said last night, the treaty is a contract between two parties. You don't have a contract between two parties get decided by popular referendum.